Can you imagine a day starting like any other, only to spiral into a nightmare? Picture this. A black woman, poised and confident, steps into a courthouse, her heart steady, her mind focused, completely unaware that she's about to face an unthinkable assault from those sworn to protect justice. They think she's nobody, just another face in the crowd. They humiliate her, violate her, and can you believe it? Laugh while doing it. But oh, how wrong they are. They've just crossed the one person who holds the power to dismantle their world legally. What unfolds is a breathtaking storm of justice, a raw exposure of truth, and a courtroom twist that turns everything upside down.
Are you ready for this? Celeste Monroe, a woman of imshakable resolve, steps out of her sleek silver Buick, her eyes catching the soft glow of dawn.
The Charleston Federal Courthouse looms before her, its stone steps bathed in the golden light filtering through ancient Spanish moss trees, casting long, eerie shadows. She adjusts the crisp collar of her navy blue blazer, squares her shoulders with quiet strength, and grips her slim leather portfolio like a shield. Her heels click softly against the concrete, each step a bold declaration of her presence. She never wears her judicial robe outside the courtroom. Why would she? Celeste prefers to blend in, to enter as a citizen, quiet, composed, always watching. But today? Today, she's not seen as the judge she is. No, she's not even acknowledged as someone with authority. To them, she's just another black woman daring to walk into a place where power has always been a hard-won battle. Can you feel the injustice already? The air shifts the moment she reaches the main security checkpoint. Deputy Hank Riker, a bailiff with a reputation for his rigid old-school attitude, locks eyes with her as she approaches the metal detectors. His gaze narrows. Does he even care who she is? Not one bit. He steps forward, his thick forearms crossed, a gloved hand raised like a barrier. "Ma'am," he growls, his voice rough as gravel, "I'm gonna need you to step out of line."
Céleste pose, juste fort à yard béat.
"Is there a problem, officer?" she asks, her tone calm but piercing. Riker doesn't answer right away. His eyes rake over her, from the silver locks meticulously twisted along her scalp to her impeccably pressed slacks, lingering on the unshakable confidence in her gaze. Something about her grates on him. She looks like she belongs here, and in his warped world, people like her need to be put in their place. No ID displayed. "You can't just waltz into a federal building looking like that," he mutters, his words dripping with disdain. Celeste, unruffled, reaches into her blazer and produces her federal credentials. The badge gleams under the harsh fluorescent lights, a symbol of her authority. But does Riker even glance at it? No. He snatches it, gives it a fleeting look, and, can you believe the audacity? Slips it into his pocket like it's nothing. Celeste raises an eyebrow, her voice steady. "I'd like that returned." He steps closer, too close, his breath hot.
You in a rush to get somewhere, sweetheart. The word l'on like a slap, sharp and stinging.
A younger female guard by the X-ray scanner shifts nervously, her eyes darting between them. She senses the tension, oh it's palpable, but stays silent, just watching. "I need to get to a courtroom," Celeste says, her voice firm, unyielding. "Then you'll follow my procedure," Riker snaps, his tone cutting. "And that includes random checks. Let's go." He doesn't give her a chance to respond. His heavy hand clamps onto her upper arm, steering her down a side hallway, away from the bustling foot traffic, into a chillingly sterile windowless screening room just beyond the security zone. Can you imagine the dread creeping in?
The air inside is cool, almost suffocatingly still.
A single steel chair sits in the center, flanked by a rolling cart of scanning equipment. And there on the edge, a pair of clippers lies idle, glinting ominously. Celeste's heart thuds once, hard in her chest. "I don't consent to this," she declares, her voice clear as a bell. "You have no legal cause to detain me."
Riker smirks, motioning to the chair.
"You're acting suspicious."
Det est cause neuf.
"Sit down."
She doesn't budge.
He leans in, his face inches from hers. "You think that badge you flashed means something? Not here. Not to me." How dare he dismiss her like that? In a flash, two more officers burst into the room. One, a man in his 30s with a shaved head and jittery eyes, grabs her left wrist with a grip that's far too tight.
Another secures the chair's other side.
Celeste's voice rises, sharp and commanding. "This is a violation."
"I want your names."
But do they answer? Not a word. Instead, Riker snatches the clippers. "What are you doing?" she demands, her heart racing. "Standard protocol," he sneers, gesturing to her locks. "You could be hiding something in that mop." Celeste tries to stand, but a brutal grip forces her back down. Can you feel her powerlessness in that moment? The clippers roar to life, their buzz filling the room like a swarm of angry bees. Before she can react, the cold metal grazes her scalp. A thick coil of silver hair, her pride, her heritage, falls to the floor. Then another, and another. Her breath catches, but she doesn't scream. She doesn't cry. She doesn't even blink. She sits there unyielding as her dignity is stripped away strand by strand, watching her silver locks pile up on the tiled floor like fragments of her past, her identity, torn away in an act of sheer cruelty. Laughter, cruel, mocking laughter, erupts from one of the guards. "She looks better already," he mutters, as if her pain is a joke. Riker, wiping loose hairs from his sleeve, adds, "Should have come in here with some respect."
Now you look more presentable.
Celeste's fists clench in her lap, her knuckles paling under the strain. But when her voice returns, it's steady, laced with steel. "You'll regret this." Riker leans down, his sneer dripping with arrogance. "People like you always say that." Oh, how wrong he is. And just like that, it's over. Riker flings open the door and gestures toward the hall.
"You're free to go."
"Courtrooms that way," he says, his tone mocking. Celeste rises slowly, her hands trembling only slightly. She grabs her badge from Riker's desk without a word and steps into the hall. Her steps are measured, her expression unreadable, but inside?
Inside, something burns sauté d'enrage, d'hyper d'humiliation.
It's purpose. And in mere minutes, that purpose will shatter their world. Because here's the truth Riker doesn't know, she's not here to watch from the sidelines. She's not a defendant. She's not here for anyone else's judgment. She's the judge, and she's about to claim her rightful place on the bench. The echo of those clippers haunts her as she leaves that cold, windowless room. Each step toward the courtroom feels heavier, not from fear, oh no, but from a fury she's holding tightly in check. Her scalp stings where her silver coils once grew, each one a testament to years of care, rooted in family, history, identity, now gone, replaced by uneven tufts that scream a violation. The hallway's silence is suffocating. She passes two clerks who glance at her, their eyes wide with whispers of what they've heard, maybe even seen. But do they speak up?
Not a chance.
They look away, cowards in the face of her pain. Celeste keeps walking, refusing to let them see her break. How could she?
Down the corridor, the low hum of voices seep through the courtroom's double doors.
It's a high-profile morning, a police misconduct hearing, officers accused of brutality during a protest last year, the nation watching, the press swarming. The stakes couldn't be higher. Celeste was meant to enter through the private chambers, her robe waiting, staff ready, decorum intact. But today? Today, none of that matters. She stops just outside the courtroom, takes a deep breath. Can you feel the weight of it? And pushes both doors open with a force that demands attention. The courtroom freezes instantly. Conversations die mid-sentence, heads whip around, and a ripple of realization spreads like wildfire. Her heels echo loudly on the marble floor as she strides past rows of lawyers, journalists, plaintiffs, and defendants. Some stare in confusion, others in utter disbelief. Who is this woman, they wonder. At the front, the judge's bench looms, her chair empty, waiting. And then it hits them like a thunderbolt. The woman they saw escorted through the hall like a suspect, her scalp bearing the scars of brutality, isn't a victim of circumstance. She's the judge.
Celeste steps behind the bench, turning slowly to face the room.
Her face is calm, cold even, a calm born not of peace, but of razor-sharp precision.
À peine clatté to the floor near the defense table, the sound piercing the silence.
Riker, the bailiff who wielded those clippers, stands by the side door. When her eyes lock onto his, he freezes, absolutely still, his lips parting, no sound escaping. The blood drains from his face, leaving him pale as a ghost. Did he realize his mistake? She doesn't flinch. Instead, she reaches for the robe folded neatly over her chair's arm. No help needed, no ceremony required. She slips it on herself, each movement deliberate, the robe settling on her shoulders like armor forged in fire. She turns to the court clerk, her voice even, unshaken. Is the docket ready? The clerk's voice cracks under the weight of the moment. Yes, Your Honor. Celeste nods once, then lowers herself into her chair, the leather groaning softly beneath her. She looks straight ahead, her gaze deliberately avoiding the man who humiliated her. Not yet, not directly. We will begin today with preliminary testimony on Case 2371F, United States v. Charleston Police Department, she declares, as if the morning's horrors never happened. Charges of abuse of power, excessive force, and civil rights violations. All parties present. A murmur of yes, Your Honor ripples back, timid and awed. The attorneys shift uncomfortably in their seats. Some are wide-eyed, stunned by her presence. Others look guilty, their consciences pricked. And some, can you believe it, are angry, furious that a black woman dared to walk in after what they thought would destroy her. She ignores them all, her focus unwavering. We will proceed. The first witness is called, an officer who was on duty during the protest in question, a man who shoved an elderly veteran to the ground, breaking 2 of his ribs in a peaceful demonstration. Celeste listens intently, her pen scratching notes, her questions held back. For now. From the corner of her eye, she sees Riker inching toward the courtroom's rear. His hands twitch at his belt, his legs restless. Does he want to vanish? He knows his reckoning is coming. And he's right. After the second witness, she calls a recess. The courtroom empties in a daze, lawyers whispering as if afraid to raise their voices. Celeste remains seated, a pillar of strength. After several minutes, when only her clerk, 2 officers, and Riker remain, she finally turns her gaze to him. Deputy Riker, she says, her voice sharp as shattered glass. He stops mid-step, frozen. Step forward. His mouth opens, stammering. Yes, Your Honor. She gestures to the center of the courtroom. He obeys, moving like a man teetering on a cliff's edge. State your full name for the record. He blinks, dazed. Hank Riker. How long have you served as bailiff at this courthouse? 14 years. She taps her pen against her legal pad, once, twice, then leans forward, her eyes boring into him. And in those 14 years, how many women have you assaulted in that screening room? The color drains from his face, leaving him ashen. Your Honor, I didn't know, that's not what I asked. She cuts in, her voice ablade. He looks around, desperate for rescue, but none comes. How many complaints have been filed against you, Deputy Riker? I'm not sure, he stammers. Celeste's voice rises, not in volume, but in devastating precision. 12 formal complaints, all buried, all dismissed, because you hid behind procedure and protocol. Can you feel the weight of her words, exposing years of injustice? Hank Riker's mouth trembled, his voice faltering as he tried to defend himself. I didn't know who you were, I thought, but Celeste Monroe cut him off, her voice slicing through the stillness like a whip. And that's the problem, isn't it? She snapped, her words crackling with righteous fury. You thought I was no one. Just another black woman you could bully, shave, and humiliate for sport. Can you imagine the audacity? The room fell deathly silent, every breath held, every eye locked on her. You didn't even bother to ask for my name. Riker opened his mouth, desperate to speak, but no sound came, his arrogance crumbling under the weight of her gaze. Celeste rose from the bench, towering with a presence that filled the courtroom. How could one woman command such power after such a violation? Because of you, she declared, her voice steady but searing, this courthouse, this supposed temple of justice, has been stained. Your actions have called the sanctity of this court into question. And because you dared to assault a federal judge in her own courthouse, you are now the subject of a criminal investigation. Effective immediately. She turned to the officers by the exit, her command unwavering. Escort Deputy Riker into custody, separate from the general population. Formal charges will follow. Can you feel the justice rolling in like a tidal wave? The officers moved with lightning speed, cuffs gleaming in their hands. No, wait. Riker shouted, his voice a pathetic plea. You can't do this. Oh, but he was so wrong. Celeste had already done it. The courtroom no longer felt like a courtroom, it was transformed, charged with the electricity of a reckoning. Deputy Hank Riker, once a towering figure of control and intimidation, was gone, led away in cuffs by two stoic officers, his badge surrendered, his power stripped away like the illusion it always was. Can you picture the shock rippling through those who thought him untouchable? Yet the aftershock lingered, heavy in the air. The silence was deafening, broken only by the overly loud hum of the ceiling fans, spinning like whispers of the truth finally exposed. Staff members exchanged sidelong glances, their faces betraying years of complicity, knowing what Riker had done, yet saying nothing. Celeste Monroe sat back in her chair, her fingers laced tightly over the bench, her judicial robe draping her like forged steel. There was no going back to the way things were. And why would she want to? Something monumental had shifted, not just within her, but in the very soul of that room. Can you sense the change? Her clerk slipped in quietly, clutching a fresh stack of notes, her steps hesitant. Your Honor, she said cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper, the next set of witnesses are being prepped. Celeste nodded, her eyes still burning with resolve. How long do we have? About 8 minutes. Celeste's gaze drifted past her, to the now empty gallery, rows of wooden benches where jurors, journalists, and the public would soon return. But Riker's presence lingered, like an oily stain on polished marble, a reminder of the corruption she was determined to erase. She exhaled slowly, her breath carrying the weight of a day that had already shattered every expectation, and it was only mid-morning. How could so much happen in so little time? The door creaked behind her, a soft sound that pulled her attention. Celeste turned, and there stood a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, her glasses fogged from rushing through the lobby. It was Megan, one of the interns, smart, quiet, the kind who rarely spoke unless prompted. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with something between fear and guilt. Celeste offered a small nod, her voice gentle. Everything okay? Megan hesitated, then closed the door behind her, stepping forward with trembling courage. Can you imagine how hard it was for her to speak? I wanted to say I saw it, Megan whispered, her voice so soft it barely reached the walls. What happened with Deputy Riker this morning, outside the screening room? I didn't know what to do. I should have said something. I was so scared. Celeste didn't respond immediately, her eyes studying the young woman's trembling hands, the weight of her confession hanging heavy. Then, with a warmth that cut through the tension, she said, "Thank you for telling me, Megan. That matters." Megan's eyes glistened, her voice breaking. I didn't stop it. No, Celeste replied softly, but you're speaking now. That's more than most. Isn't it incredible how one voice can spark change? Megan looked like she might crumble under the weight of her emotions, but she straightened her shoulders, her resolve hardening. If you need me to testify, I will, she declared, her voice stronger now. Celeste reached across the desk, placing a hand over Megan's for just a moment, a silent gesture of warmth, no words needed. The courtroom doors creaked again, this time with a heavier thud, signaling the public's return. Celeste stood, her presence commanding. All rise, the clerk called out, her voice steadier now, ringing with newfound confidence. Everyone obeyed, even those who'd once snickered at Riker's cruel jokes behind closed doors. Can you feel the shift in power? Celeste resumed her seat, her authority undeniable. Court is back in session, she announced, and the atmosphere changed, subtly, sharply, irrevocably. The power in the room was no longer in question. This wasn't just a hearing anymore, it was a reckoning. The next witness took the stand, a black father named Howard Briggs, mid-40s, a warehouse foreman with a salt and pepper beard and hands roughened by decades of labor. His eyes were hollow, yet burned with determination. He was there to testify about a nightmare, his 17-year-old son, tackled and pinned during a peaceful protest by the very officers now seated at the defense table. One had crushed the boy's windpipe with his knee. The teen survived, but barely, his voice reduced to a whisper. That was 9 months ago, and the pain still lingered. Can you imagine the father's anguish? Howard sat on the witness stand, his voice steady but heavy with grief as he poured out his story. He told the court everything, how they'd begged for paramedics, how the officers dismissed them with a cruel, "He'll be fine, he's faking." How no one listened. And when the footage finally surfaced, not a single officer faced discipline. Celeste didn't interrupt, not once. She didn't need to. Every word Howard spoke was a blade, slicing through the courtroom, cutting deep into the hearts of everyone present. His pain was a mirror to her own, a shared wound of being silenced. How could anyone remain unmoved? When he finished, Celeste leaned forward, her voice soft but resonant.
Monsieur Brigue, thank you for your courage.
I know this isn't easy. He nodded, his voice cracking as tears welled in his eyes. I just want to know that it meant something, that someone is finally listening. Celeste looked at him, not as a judge perched on a bench, but as a woman who knew the sting of being unheard. You've been heard, she said, her words a solemn promise. Can you feel the weight of that moment, the power of being truly seen? A few minutes later, after Howard stepped down, walking slowly past the officers who had nearly stolen his son's life, Celeste called for another short recess.
Her chambre soit quiet, tout quiet, the stillness almost oppressive.
She sat for a moment, staring at her reflection in the mirror above the wash basin. Her uneven hair, the raw patch just above her left ear, it didn't look like the reflection of a judge. It looked like a warrior who'd just survived a battle. But isn't that what justice is? Not a polished performance, but a fierce fight for truth, one she'd never back down from. A knock broke her thoughts. Her clerk opened the door halfway. Your Honor, the U.S. Attorney's Office just submitted a sealed motion. They want to escalate charges against Riker immediately, civil rights violations under federal law. Celeste didn't blink, her resolve unshaken. Good. Accept it, she commanded. As the door closed, she allowed herself a single breath, not of relief, but of ironclad determination. Today was far from over. Riker may have fallen, but the real reckoning? Oh, it was just beginning. Can you feel the storm brewing? The courtroom filled again, but it wasn't the same space anymore. Something unspoken had shifted, a silent transformation hanging in the air like the electric buzz before a thunderstorm. It was the kind of weight that made people sit straighter, speak softer, and rethink who truly held the power. Celeste Monroe stepped back onto the bench, her presence undeniable. No bailiff announced her this time, no ceremonial flourish, just the resolute sound of her shoes against the hardwood and the quiet rustle of her robe as she took her seat. Everyone rose instinctively, as if drawn by her gravity. She didn't speak immediately, letting her gaze sweep over the room, the defendants, the press, the attorneys, the onlookers, some still wide-eyed from the morning's seismic events. They were all waiting, holding their breath. What would she do next? How far would she take this? Was this a fleeting moment or the start of a movement? She tapped the gavel once, the sound crisp and final. Court is now in session, she declared, and just like that the room settled, the tension coalescing into focus. She turned to the prosecution table. Call your next witness. The room hushed, anticipation crackling. An officer, Lieutenant Daniel Cook, was sworn in, tall, built like a linebacker, his clean-shaven face and rigid posture screaming confidence, as if his badge made him untouchable. He sat, cleared his throat, and folded his hands in his lap. Celeste studied him for a long moment, her eyes piercing. She knew his type, proud, polished, trained to lie with a smile and never break a sweat. Did he think he could outmaneuver her? The prosecutor began, her questions methodical, precise. Lieutenant Cook, you were present at the demonstration on May 14th last year, correct? Yes, ma'am, he replied smoothly. And during that time, you oversaw a team of 7 officers? Yes, that's correct. Did you personally authorize the use of force against protesters? Cook leaned forward, speaking into the mic like he was delivering a press briefing. I authorized non-lethal crowd control measures after protesters became aggressive. There was yelling, pushing, some were armed with bottles and rocks. His tone was rehearsed, almost smug. Can you believe the nerve? Any injuries reported from your team? The prosecutor pressed. No, ma'am. And the injuries sustained by protesters? Minor, mostly bruises, he said dismissively. But Celeste's voice cut through like a blade before the prosecutor could continue. Lieutenant Cook. He turned, startled. Yes, Your Honor. Do you consider a crushed trachea to be a minor injury? The question hung in the air, heavy and damning. Well, no, ma'am. Of course not, he stammered, his polish cracking. Celeste leaned forward slightly, her gaze unrelenting. Then why did your official incident report describe it as a soft tissue trauma consistent with resistance? Cook shifted uncomfortably, his confidence wavering. That's standard language. It was based on initial impressions. Initial impressions from whom? She pressed, her voice unyielding. He squirmed. I believe it was Officer Valdez who filled out that section. Celeste's eyes never left him. And did you review and approve that language, knowing the victim was 17 years old and unarmed? A pause, thick with tension. Cook opened his mouth, closed it, then finally admitted yes. Can you feel the truth unraveling? Her tone remained steady, a quiet storm. Do you believe justice was served that day? Silence engulfed the room. I believe we followed protocol, he muttered, dodging. Celeste sat back, her voice cutting. That wasn't the question. Cook cleared his throat, grasping for control. With respect, Your Honor, I can't answer that. That's not my role. Celeste nodded slowly, her eyes like fire. No, it's mine. She turned to the prosecution. You may proceed. Isn't it astounding how she commands the truth? The rest of Cook's testimony was dry, clinical, but every word landed like a blow, not just for the facts, but for the way he tried to normalize the brutality, to make it seem acceptable routine. When the recess was called, the gallery buzzed with whispers, reporters typing furiously, advocates scribbling notes. A woman near the back clutched her chest, silently mouthing, "Thank you," as Celeste passed, her gratitude a quiet testament to the judge's impact. Can you see the ripples spreading? In her chambers, Celeste removed her robe, hanging it carefully, her movements deliberate. She stared at it, the black fabric so plain, so unassuming on the hanger. Yet out there, that robe carried weight. It changed everything. When she wore it, people stood, they listened, they feared her power. But just hours ago, with the same face, the same heart, the same unyielding dignity, without that robe, she was assaulted, stripped, treated like she was nothing. The contradiction burned in her bones, a fire behind her eyes, a pulse of resolve that would not be silenced. Isn't that the heart of true justice? The contradiction of that morning's brutality versus her unyielding authority pulsed through Celeste Monroe's very being. It burned behind her eyes, a fire of righteous indignation, and echoed in the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. How could such injustice coexist with her power to right it? A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. Your Honor. It was her clerk again, voice tentative yet urgent. There's someone from the DOJ asking to speak with you. They say it's critical. Celeste straightened, her resolve hardening like steel. Send them in, she commanded. A man in a crisp gray suit stepped through the door, his demeanor calm, composed, almost too polished for the chaos of the day. He handed her a sealed envelope, his eyes betraying a flicker of awe. Judge Monroe, I'm with the Office of Civil Rights. I was dispatched the moment reports of this morning's incident hit our desk. Can you believe how fast the wheels of justice began to turn? Fast response, Celeste remarked, her tone dry as she unfolded the letter, her fingers steady despite the storm within. The man's voice was grave as he continued. This courthouse is now under federal review. What happened in that screening room isn't just misconduct, it's a Title 18 violation. And now that we know the victim was a federal judge, he trailed off, the weight of the revelation hanging heavy. Celeste didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes, a quiet storm of determination. He pressed on. We're launching an immediate investigation into the Charleston District Courthouse staff, digging into prior complaints, suppression of reports, and potential obstruction. Celeste's eyes met his, unwavering. Good, she said softly, but with a force that could move mountains. Start with the supervisors who buried those 12 complaints against Riker. Then look at the judges who signed off. Can you feel the ground shaking beneath the corrupt? He nodded, as if he'd anticipated her exact words. Oh, and Judge Monroe, he added, pausing at the door, his voice softening, you should know the footage of this morning has gone viral. It's everywhere, CNN, MSNBC, social media. Even some senators are talking about it. Celeste gave the faintest shake of her head, a wry smile tugging at her lips. I didn't do it for them, she declared, her voice steady but fierce. He smiled, a genuine warmth breaking through his professional facade. No, that's exactly why it matters. And with that, he was gone, leaving her alone with the weight of a moment that was rewriting history. Isn't it incredible how one act of courage can ripple so far? Celeste sank slowly into her chair, the leather creaking under her. Out there, beyond her chambers, the courtroom buzzed with the next set of defense attorneys gathering. She could hear it, the sharp tap of their polished shoes against the hardwood, the nervous shuffle of papers, the hushed, frantic whispers between counsel. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But was she ready? Oh, she was more than ready. Today wasn't just about exposing one racist bailiff. It was about tearing the mask off an entire rotten system, and the unraveling had only just begun. Can you feel the anticipation building? The courtroom was packed to capacity now, every seat filled, every corner humming with tension. Word had spread like wildfire, first about Riker's arrest, then the shocking video, and now the woman at the center of it all, a federal judge who'd walked into a courthouse and been treated like she was nothing, only to rise, unbroken, and take her rightful place on the bench. Who could resist witnessing what came next? Camera crews swarmed outside, their lenses trained on the courthouse steps. Reporters crammed the back rows, pens poised, eyes wide. Civil rights attorneys jetted in from Atlanta, D.C., even Chicago. The air crackled with pressure. It wasn't just a case anymore. This was history colliding with justice in real time. Can you imagine being in that room? Judge Celeste Monroe stood just behind the bench, her presence a quiet force as her clerk leaned in, whispering urgently. "They're here, Your Honor, the defense attorneys. They're asking for special counsel." Celeste raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. "On what grounds?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. "They claim the case is tainted, that the judge is personally compromised." A slow, deliberate breath escaped her lips. "Of course," she murmured, almost to herself. "Of course they'd try to flip it. They couldn't deny the facts, so they'd attack the woman delivering them." Celeste nodded once, her decision made. "Let them ask. I'll give them my answer on the record." Isn't it infuriating how they tried to undermine her strength? She stepped into the courtroom, and the tension was palpable, a living thing that gripped every soul present. "All rise," the clerk called, and the room obeyed instantly, a collective act of respect, or perhaps fear. Celeste didn't glance left or right. She walked with purpose, took her place, and tapped her gavel once, the sound cutting through the hum like a blade. "Be seated." The air shifted, as if everyone had exhaled a held breath. A defense attorney in a pinstripe suit rose, exuding confidence, his late-40s swagger honed for jury trials and TV interviews. "Your Honor, before we proceed, we'd like to make a formal request." Celeste cut in, her voice razor-sharp. "Due to recent developments, you mean the arrest of Deputy Riker and the incident in the courthouse hallway?" He hesitated, caught off guard. "Can you see him squirming?" "Yes, Your Honor," he stammered, clearing his throat. "And our concern is what exactly?" Celeste's eyes bored into him, unyielding. "That these events may present a conflict of interest, a question of judicial impartiality." The gallery bristled, a low murmur swelling like a wave. Celeste didn't blink. "You're suggesting that because I was assaulted this morning, I can't carry out the duties of my position?" Her words were a challenge, daring him to justify his audacity. "I'm suggesting," he said carefully, tiptoeing around the truth, "that the perception of bias," Celeste raised a hand, silencing him mid-sentence. "Let me stop you right there," she declared, her voice a thunderclap. How could he even dare? She stood, moving slowly to the edge of the bench, her presence commanding every eye. "I was publicly assaulted, humiliated, not for what I said, not for what I did, but for who I am. Because someone saw a black woman walking into a courtroom and decided she couldn't possibly hold power." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Let that sink in. "And what did I do in response? I took my seat. I conducted this hearing. I followed every rule, every code of conduct. I've been calm, measured, respectful, even when others were not." The attorney's jaw clenched, his confidence crumbling under her gaze. Celeste's voice sharpened, each word a dagger. "You know what real bias looks like, counselor? Real bias is a man using clippers to shave off a woman's hair without cause, without warrant, without even asking her name. Real bias is 12 ignored complaints from people who looked like me, buried by this very institution."
Can you feel the truth cutting through?
She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his, unrelenting. "You want to talk about conflict of interest? Let's talk about how many judges signed off on Deputy Riker's behavior over the years. Let's talk about how many prosecutors declined to follow up. Let's talk about your firm's history of defending officers with abuse records longer than their resumes." He looked ready to object, but he didn't, because she was right. Celeste straightened, her authority absolute. This court will proceed.
I will not récuser myself.
And if you believe the facts of this case won't stand under my authority, you're welcome to appeal. I'll even provide the paperwork myself. She tapped the gavel again, the sound final.
Next witness.
Isn't it exhilarating to see her stand unyielding? The prosecution called forward someone unexpected, not a victim, not a protester, but a former courthouse employee, a middle-aged black woman in a sharp suit, cropped hair, and glasses. Her name was Denise Talley, and Celeste recognized her instantly, not just from personnel files, but from years of quiet, efficient work in the shadows.
Now, Denise was stepping into the light.
She was sworn in, sat down, adjusted her blazer with a steady hand. The prosecutor approached. Miss Talley, can you tell us about your former position at this courthouse? I was the record supervisor for 8 years, she said, her voice clear. Before that, I worked the front desk. And during your time here, were you ever made aware of complaints against Deputy Riker? Her eyes hardened, a storm brewing. Yes. Too many to count. Can you estimate? 12 official. At least twice that many informal. And what happened to those complaints? Denise glanced at Celeste, her voice slowing, deliberate. They were mishandled. Some were marked resolved when they weren't. Some disappeared entirely. Can you believe the systemic betrayal? The courtroom stirred, a ripple of shock spreading. Who gave those instructions? The prosecutor pressed.
À pause, heavy with anticipation.
Then, Judge Terence Mahoney.
The name landed like a thunderclap, reverberating through the room.
Mahoney, retired 6 months ago, his reputation pristine, respected, Celeste's own mentor once upon a time. But now, the truth was undeniable. Why would he suppress those reports? The prosecutor asked. Denise's voice trembled, but she answered. He said bringing them forward would undermine public trust, that it would make the courthouse look weak. Celeste sat perfectly still, the lie, a lie she'd heard before, cutting deep. Justice delayed for appearances? Abuse tolerated for order?
How could such de s'effacer so long?
She glanced around, catching the faces of those who'd looked away for years. Some were realizing in real time that they'd served not justice, but silence. Denise pressed on, her voice growing stronger. I watched men like Riker walk these halls with impunity. I saw young black interns searched, questioned. I saw witnesses intimidated, brushed off. And every time I spoke up, I was told, that's just how it is. Her voice cracked, raw with pain. Well, not anymore. Celeste swallowed hard, her throat tight. This wasn't just testimony, it was a sledgehammer, cracking the system wide open. She called for a recess, and everyone stood, the weight of Denise's words lingering. As Celeste stepped away, a young reporter in the gallery whispered, she's not just running this courtroom, she's rewriting it. And he was right. This wasn't a trial anymore, it was a reckoning, its ripples destined to reach far beyond these walls.
Can you feel the shift?
And it was far from over. By early afternoon, the courthouse steps were no longer quiet. What began as a handful of reporters with cameras had swelled into a vibrant crowd, protesters, community leaders, citizens of every background, black, white, old, young. Some held signs, others stood in silent vigil, watching, waiting. This wasn't chaos, it was something heavier, focused, a collective demand for truth. Inside, Celeste sat at her desk, gazing out her chamber's window at the sea of faces. She could read their signs, justice starts now.
Protect black women.
12 complaints, 0 accountability. She closed her eyes, not to shut it out, but to embrace it fully, the noise, the pressure, the truth clawing its way to the surface after years buried under red tape and silence. Isn't it powerful how the voiceless are finally heard? Another knock came at her door. Her clerk stepped in, but behind her stood a figure from Celeste's past, Reverend Marcus Hill, a man she hadn't seen in nearly a decade. He moved with the calm strength of someone who'd faced too much yet still chose to fight. His gray beard was fuller now, his eyes tired but kind, radiating wisdom. Judge Monroe, he said, his voice warm. Reverend, she replied, rising, her heart stirring. I won't take much of your time. I just wanted you to know we're out there. We see what you're doing, and we're with you. Celeste nodded, swallowing the sudden emotion tightening her throat. Can you imagine the support lifting her spirit? He handed her a folded piece of paper, his hand steady. Some of these people outside? They were victims, too, of Riker, of others like him. They were never called to court, never heard, but they're ready now. If you want their stories, they're ready to talk. She unfolded the list. Names, phone numbers, handwritten notes, a litany of pain longer than she'd expected. How many are new complaints? She asked, her voice steady but urgent.
Most.
Some go back years. Some were afraid, others told it wasn't worth it. Celeste looked up, her eyes blazing. They were wrong. It's worth it now. Marcus smiled faintly, a spark of pride in his gaze. It is because of you. She didn't reply, but her silence roared louder than words. Isn't it humbling how one woman's stand inspires so many? When he left, she stared at the list, each name a life this courthouse had ignored, brushed off, laughed at, written off. But not anymore. Back in the courtroom, the gallery had doubled, the air electric with anticipation. Denise Talley's testimony had spread like wildfire, reporters live-streaming, people outside watching on phones through courthouse windows, huddled together in the October sun. The energy had transformed. Celeste's fight was no longer hers alone. Can you feel the collective power rising? When Celeste Monroe strode into the courtroom, the room rose to its feet, but oh, how different it felt this time. It wasn't just tradition or her title commanding their respect, it was what she embodied now, a beacon of unyielding justice, a woman who'd faced brutality and emerged stronger. Can you feel the electricity in the air? She tapped her gavel once, the sound sharp and resolute. We're ready to proceed, she declared, her voice steady, a clarion call for truth. The next witness was a surprise, a man sent not to investigate, but to testify. Andrew Taylor, a black man in his late 50s, over 20 years with the U.S. Marshal Service, stepped forward. His slight limp, a scar from a 2001 arrest gone wrong, told a story of its own. Can you imagine the courage it took for him to stand there? Years ago, Taylor had walked these very halls, and now he stood before Celeste's bench, carrying a truth he could no longer bury. He took the oath, sat down, adjusted the microphone with a trembling hand, and began. I worked here from 2004 to 2012, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of years. I saw a lot, too much. Most of it, I let slide. I didn't want trouble, didn't want to be labeled the angry black officer. He looked directly at Celeste, his eyes locking with hers, raw with regret. But what I saw from Riker. I should have reported it. I didn't, and I regret it every single day. How could he carry such guilt for so long? Celeste nodded slowly, her silence a gift, giving him space to unburden his soul. Taylor pressed on, his voice gaining strength. It started small, disrespect, over-policing young men, snide comments, but it escalated. By 2010, Riker wasn't just aggressive, he was dangerous. The prosecutor leaned in. Did you report him? Taylor's jaw tightened. I filed a memo to Internal Affairs, he said, his voice low.
It vanished.
When I asked about it, they told me, quote, he's the kind of man we want handling difficult people. The room erupted in disgusted murmurs, a wave of outrage. Celeste's gavel cracked down, silencing them instantly. Can you believe the audacity of that cover-up? Taylor sat forward, his eyes blazing with resolve. I left this courthouse 2 years later, not because of the work, but because of what it did to me.
The silence, the guy, it at me.
But now, I'm here to tell the truth. Judge Monroe, what you did, sitting in that chair after what they did to you, that's bigger than a bench. It's a revolution. The room fell still, every breath held, every heart pounding. For the first time all day, Celeste had no words, not because she was speechless, but because sometimes when history kneels at your feet, you don't speak over it.
You let it echo.
Can you feel the weight of that moment? The next morning, the air outside the Charleston Federal Courthouse was thick, heavy with the threat of rain. The early fall sky hung low, gray clouds pressing down on the city like a warning. A reckoning was coming. But inside Judge Celeste Monroe's chambers, the silence was colder, more piercing. She sat at her desk, a thick manila folder before her, labeled Confidential Internal Records in stark black ink. It had been slipped to her by a court administrator who'd said nothing, just nodded, placed it on her desk, and left as if it burned his hands to hold it. What secrets did it hide? Celeste opened it slowly, her fingers steady but her heart racing. Inside were documents, memos, emails, signatures, 12 formal complaints against Deputy Hank Riker, spanning 15 years, all dismissed. All signed off by a name that struck her like a betrayal, Judge Terrence Mahoney, her former mentor, the man who'd sponsored her into the federal circuit, who'd once told her she was exactly what the bench needed.
Au coude.
Now she saw his signature scrawled at the bottom of denial after denial, each form stamped with cold bureaucratic indifference, allegation unsubstantiated. Lack of corroborating evidence. No further action required. Her breath caught as she uncovered a memo tucked at the back, a confidential exchange between Mahoney and the head of courthouse security from 5 years ago. She read it once, then again, her eyes narrowing. Riker may be rough around the edges, but he keeps order, especially with certain groups. Best to leave well enough alone. Her fingers curled, crumpling the page. There it was, the ugly truth laid bare. This wasn't just about Riker anymore, it was the entire machine that shielded him, endorsed him, encouraged him to grow rougher, louder, crueler, all to maintain their twisted version of order. Can you fathom the depth of that corruption? Celeste leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. This wasn't a case anymore, it was a purge. She glanced at her reflection in the glossy desk, her uneven hair, the raw patches where her silver coils once grew, her tired eyes still blazing with fire.
À Knockbrock rêverie.
Her clerk again, voice soft but urgent. Your Honor, she said, we've received a formal inquiry from the Senate Judiciary Committee. They're asking for your statement on judicial oversight failures tied to the Riker incident.
Celeste's lips curved into a humorless smile.
Of course they are. Now that the cameras are rolling. The clerk hesitated, then added, there's more. 2 retired judges and 1 former DA resigned this morning, citing health reasons. Celeste didn't respond, she didn't need to. She stood, her resolve unshakable. Bring in the attorneys. All of them. We're finishing this today.
Can you feel the momentum building?
An hour later, the courtroom was standing room only, a sea of faces packed tight with anticipation. This wasn't just Charleston anymore, it was national. Reporters from the New York Times, Washington Post, even the BBC squeezed into the gallery, their pens flying. A row of young black law students sat shoulder to shoulder in the front pew, notebooks open, eyes wide with awe. This was their future unfolding. Celeste took her seat, tapped her gavel, the sound cutting through the buzz. This court is in session, she declared, her voice a command that settled the room. She turned to the gallery, her gaze sweeping over every face. Before we proceed with closing arguments, I'd like to enter new material into the record. She nodded to her clerk, who handed copies of the damning folder to both tables. This includes all complaints filed against Deputy Riker, all correspondence related to their suppression, and the names of every individual who signed off on dismissing them. Can you imagine the shock on their faces? The defense attorney leapt up, ready to object, but Celeste raised a hand. Sit down, she ordered, her words soft but final, like a blade slipping through silk. She turned to the gallery, her voice resonant. Let the record show that this court is done protecting institutions at the expense of individuals. We're done pretending silence is neutrality. Her eyes swept the room, fierce and unyielding. Every signature in this folder represents a choice, not a mistake. A choice to ignore victims, to protect predators, to uphold an illusion of order built on fear. She locked eyes with the defense attorney, her stare piercing. And it ends today.
Auschfell, so deep you could hear a pen freeze mid-scratch.
Then from the room's edge, a voice called out, Your Honor. It was a man in his 60s, standing hesitantly by the doorway, hat clutched in his hands.
May he speak?
Can you feel the room holding its breath? Celeste paused, then nodded. He stepped forward, voice trembling. My name is Louis Bryant, he said. In 2011, Riker arrested me in this building for raising my voice when my daughter's case was dismissed. He slammed me into a wall, broke 2 of my ribs. Celeste nodded, her expression steady. Was a complaint filed? I filed it myself, right there at the front desk. They told me I tripped and fell. That's what the report said.
He never came back.
He looked around, his voice stronger. But I'm here now. Celeste stood, her presence towering. Anyone else? A pause, then hands began to rise. 5, 10, 15. Each with a story, each with a silence that had festered too long. Now they had a voice. Celeste didn't cry, didn't smile, didn't move. She stood, watching the truth rise like a tide, no longer whispered, no longer hidden, but spoken at last. Isn't it powerful how truth breaks free? The final day of the hearing dawned with rain, not a gentle drizzle, but a torrential downpour, washing over Charleston like a warning and a reckoning rolled into one. Streets flooded, power lines swayed, yet still they came, reporters, protesters, clerks, interns, witnesses, braving the storm with umbrellas, ponchos, cameras, and signs. Why? Because everyone knew what was happening in that courtroom wasn't just justice, it was history. Inside, the atmosphere was hushed but electric, the air pulsing with the promise of something irreversible. Celeste walked in, silent, no gavel yet, no declaration. She paused at the bench, her eyes scanning the packed gallery, then did something extraordinary. She removed her robe, folded it gently, and laid it across her chair. She stood there, unshielded by title or tradition, just a woman, scarred yes, but standing tall. Can you picture the courage in that act? And then she spoke, her voice clear, resolute. I've sat behind this bench for years. I've worn the robe, carried the title, delivered rulings, followed procedure. But I've also stayed silent longer than I should have, and today? I'm done being quiet. She glanced at the defense table, the prosecution, then the citizens who'd been silenced, ignored, cast aside. This court finds Deputy Hank Riker guilty of abuse of power, violation of civil rights, and official misconduct. But it doesn't stop there. She stepped forward, her presence commanding. This court recommends immediate review of every complaint ever filed under his name and a formal investigation into any official who suppressed them. She turned to the court reporter. Put that on the record. No applause followed, only silence, the kind that follows a bomb dropping. Can you hear the impact? Slowly, she reached for a folder beneath the desk, unopened until now, and held it high. This, she said, her voice unwavering, is a policy proposal, effective immediately. I'm instituting a mandate for all bailiffs, marshals, and courthouse personnel under this jurisdiction. Her words rang out. It's called the Monroe Mandate. Heads lifted at the name, a ripple of awe spreading. It demands comprehensive anti-bias training, psychological screening, regular evaluations, and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior in federal courthouses. And I'll take this to the circuit, to the judiciary, to the Senate if I must. What happened to me should never happen to anyone. I'll make damn sure it never happens again. The gallery stirred, nods, silent tears, hands clasping in stunned solidarity. She continued, let me be clear, this isn't about revenge. It's about responsibility, accountability, about staring this broken system in the face and saying, not anymore. She turned to the defense, to those who'd let Riker run rampant for over a decade. Consider yourselves on notice. Isn't it thrilling to see a system challenged? Celeste Monroe tapped the folder again, her fingers firm against the paper that held the weight of truth. I will be forwarding recommendations for disbarment, formal review, and possible charges to the Department of Justice for every official who played a role in burying the truth, she declared, her voice ringing with unshakable resolve. Can you imagine the courage it took to call out an entire system? The courtroom froze, every soul riveted, unable to move under the gravity of her words. Then Celeste lifted her gaze, past the benches, to the tall arched window behind the gallery. The storm outside raged on, rain lashing against the glass, but, oh look! A beam of sunlight broke through, spilling across the marble floor like a promise of hope. She nodded once, as if the timing itself was a sign, a quiet affirmation of her mission. Isn't it incredible how nature mirrors justice? Before we conclude, there's one final piece of business, she announced, her eyes shifting to the side entrance. The officer swung open the door, and in walked Hank Riker, his wrists bound in cuffs, no longer clad in the uniform that once gave him power. His face was pale, hollow, broken, not by bruises or beatings, but by the weight of his own actions. Can you see the man who thought himself untouchable now reduced to this? He was led to the front, standing beside his public defender, a shadow of his former arrogance. Celeste faced him, not with vengeance, but with a fire that burned brighter than anger. Mr. Riker, she began, her voice steady, This court sentences you to the maximum allowable penalties under federal law: 6 years imprisonment for abuse of power, 5 years for civil rights violations, and an additional year for obstruction." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "But that's just the legal part." Riker didn't look up, his eyes fixed on the floor, as if he could escape her judgment. "And here's the human part now." Celeste's voice dropped, calm but slicing through the air like a blade. "You spent your career deciding who was worthy of dignity and who wasn't. You thought your badge made you immune, that silence would shield you, that people like me would never hold the gavel. Well, now you get to sit in the seat you made for others. No badge, no robe, just the crushing weight of what you've done." She nodded to the officers. "Take him away." Can you feel the finality of that moment, the justice delivered with such precision? As Riker was escorted out, the courtroom didn't erupt in cheers or applause. No one clapped. They just watched, their silence a powerful testament to the moment. This wasn't about celebration, it was about witnessing. And isn't witnessing sometimes more profound than any cheer? Celeste's gaze fell to the file before her, the Monroe Mandate, a beacon of reform. She closed it with a deliberate motion, lifted her robe from the bench, and spoke one last time. "Court is adjourned." The words echoed, a closing note to a day that had rewritten the rules of justice. Can you hear the power in those simple words? The courthouse emptied slowly, like a storm clearing one drop at a time. People didn't rush out, they lingered, their footsteps soft, their voices hushed in quiet conversations, some sharing soft embraces. A few paused to touch the banisters, the courtroom doors, as if grounding themselves to a place that had, until now, felt like an unyielding fortress, too cold to bend. But today? Today it had cracked open, revealing the possibility of change. Celeste sat alone in her chambers, the file folders gone, the courtroom silent. Her robe hung on the back of her chair as it always did, but this time it felt different, lighter, as if the burden of silence had been lifted, spoken aloud at last. Can you imagine the relief of that moment? She turned in her chair, facing the mirror behind her desk. Her reflection stared back, raw and real. The uneven patches on her scalp, where her silver coils had been brutally shorn, were beginning to grow out, delicate new strands pushing through. Those coils, once a crown of her heritage, were returning, but slowly, unevenly. A part of her wanted to hide them, to cover the scars, to smooth over the vulnerability still exposed. But why should she? A knock broke her thoughts, soft but familiar. It was her sister, Nain, stepping into the room without a word, her presence a quiet comfort. She crossed to the corner, pulled out a folding stool, and set it behind Celeste. With a gentle hand, she lifted a small pair of clippers and plugged them in. "You ready?" she asked, her voice warm, steady. Celeste met her sister's eyes in the mirror. No fear lingered there, only resolve, fierce and unwavering. "Yes," she whispered. "Let's finish it." Can you feel the power in that choice? Nain moved with care, her touch gentle, deliberate. Each pass of the clippers was a reclamation, stripping away the uneven strands, not in shame, not as an act of violence like before, but as a choice, a fresh start. The remaining patches fell away one by one, each cut a step toward healing. When Nain finished, she handed Celeste a small mirror. Celeste held it, hesitating for a heartbeat, then looked. The reflection was bold, bare, strong, and breathtakingly beautiful. You could rock that every damn day and still own every room you walk into. Nain said with a grin, her eyes sparkling with pride. Celeste didn't answer immediately, her gaze locked on her reflection. "This is who I am now," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "No," Nain corrected, her tone firm but loving, "this is who you've always been. Now the rest of the world's just caught up." They shared a smile, a moment of unspoken understanding. Isn't it amazing how family can anchor us in our truth? That night, Celeste walked out of the courthouse, no wig, no scarf, no hat, just her head held high, bare under the soft glow of Charleston city lights. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, a small group of onlookers spotted her. No cameras, no reporters, just ordinary people, their faces alight with awe. An elderly woman, maybe in her 70s, brown-skinned with thick glasses, stepped forward, her hand trembling as she gently touched Celeste's arm. "I never thought I'd live to see someone like you do what you just did," she said, her voice quivering with emotion. Celeste took her hand, her grip warm and steady. "You did more than survive. You paved the road." Can you feel the connection between generations in that touch? Behind her, a teenager approached shyly, her eyes wide, no words needed. She pulled off her hoodie, revealing her own short, shaved head, and gave a single nod. Celeste nodded back, a silent bond passing between them, a legacy of resilience, a shared inheritance. Later that night, Celeste stood on her front porch, gazing out over her quiet neighborhood. Porch lights flickered gently, a soft wind stirring the oak trees. Inside, her phone buzzed relentlessly, texts, emails, news headlines clamoring for attention, but she let them wait. Tonight wasn't about the noise. It was about hearing herself breathe, truly free for the first time. Can you imagine the peace in that moment? The next morning, she returned to the courthouse, business as usual, at least on paper. But oh, how everything had changed. People noticed. The robe stayed off longer than usual, a quiet defiance. The stares lingered, but not with confusion or dismissal. Now they were filled with recognition, with respect. As she stepped into the judge's elevator, the janitor gave her a nod, his fist pressed to his chest in a gesture of pride. A younger security officer flashed a subtle thumbs up, then quickly looked away, his cheeks flushing with admiration. Can you see the shift in how they saw her? When she entered the courtroom for a new hearing, just a routine civil dispute, the entire room stood before the clerk even announced her. That had never happened before. She nodded once, took her seat, and the law marched on, more cases, more motions, more files. But something fundamental had shifted, not just in the rules, but in the very air of the room. Justice had a new face now, and it didn't apologize for the space it claimed. Celeste walked the halls differently, not louder, not harsher, but fuller, like someone who'd been forced to shrink for years and finally remembered the power of standing tall. Isn't it inspiring how she reclaimed her presence? The cameras kept coming, interviews she declined, headlines she ignored. But one caught her eye, taped to the breakroom fridge. Federal judge refuses to back down after public assault, launches historic reform from the bench. Someone had scrawled in Sharpie below it, "She's our judge." And that? That brought a smile to her lips, warm and genuine. She hadn't set out to be a symbol, she'd only meant to do her job. But somewhere along the way, standing her ground became something more, permission for others to stand too. Can you feel the ripple effect of her courage? Months passed, and the courtroom, once a place of silence and fear, transformed. It wasn't perfect, not peaceful, but it held a new presence, a stillness born of knowing you'd be heard. The Monroe Mandate spread like wildfire, first within the courthouse, then across the district. Other judges adopted it, other cities called to learn more. A bill was even being drafted in Congress. Celeste hadn't planned that, none of this was planned. But she hadn't backed down, and that alone turned the tide. Isn't it astounding how one woman's resolve can reshape a system? She kept working day in, day out, civil disputes, custody cases, tax hearings, but every decision now carried a deeper intention, a louder awareness of who the law had ignored. One afternoon, she stepped into a middle school classroom, invited to speak about justice, about courage. She expected a handful of kids, some awkward silence, but the room was packed. They'd watched the trial, read the articles, written essays, made signs. One, taped to the chalkboard, read simply, "Be like Judge Monroe." Can you imagine the pride swelling in her chest? She spoke briefly. Her words didn't need to be long to carry weight. The kids asked the real questions. How do you stay calm when people hate you? What did it feel like when they cut your hair? Did you ever want to give up? She answered honestly, her voice steady, her heart open. But one question from a quiet girl in the corner, barely above a whisper, stayed with her. Do you still believe in the system? Celeste paused, then answered, I don't believe in what the system was. But I believe in what it can become, and I believe in people like you asking that question. That's how it changes. When she left, she cried in her car, not from pain, but from hope, raw and radiant. Can you feel the future in those tears? Not long after, the White House called, not for a soundbite, but for something monumental. Celeste had been chosen for the Presidential Medal of Justice. The ceremony would be televised, speeches prepared, dignitaries filling the room, but none of that mattered to her. What mattered was who'd be in the front row: Nain, her clerk, her former intern Megan, now a first-year law student, Reverend Hill, and in the far corner, surrounded by suited officials, the quiet girl from the classroom who'd asked the real question. Can you picture the power of that gathering? The stage was grand, white marble steps leading to the podium, the president standing to the side. When Celeste stepped forward, applause rose like a wave, but she didn't wave or raise her hand. She simply stepped to the microphone and began. "I wasn't supposed to be here." The room fell silent. Not because I wasn't qualified, not because I didn't earn it, but because systems like this weren't built for people like me. She looked out over the crowd, her voice steady. And when I stepped into the spaces I'd worked my life to reach, I was still told I didn't belong. But I stayed. I stood and I made them see me. She paused, the weight of her journey hanging in the air. "I'm not here because I'm special. I'm here because I survived a moment that should have broken me, and because I knew too many who didn't."
A Flasbulbe clicked, capturing the moment.
This medal isn't just mine. It belongs to every woman told to stay quiet, every man told justice wasn't for him, every child who saw only fear in the law.
This is for you.
The applause was deep, respectful, a recognition of truth finally understood. Can you hear the echoes of her words? As the ceremony ended, Celeste stepped off the stage. Far away, in a state prison across the state line, Hank Riker watched on a small mounted TV. He didn't blink, didn't move, didn't speak, just stared as the woman he tried to break stood before the nation, honored for the strength he'd sought to erase. The screen went black, but the silence stayed, not punishment, but truth, the one thing he couldn't silence. Isn't it poetic how justice finds its mark? This wasn't just a story of one woman or one courthouse. It was about dignity, truth, and the moment we say, enough is enough. Celeste didn't just uphold the law, she became the line in the sand. She showed us that justice isn't just punishment, it's accountability, the strength to rise after being stripped down, to speak when silence is easier, to lead with integrity when the system turns against you. For those who've seen change and resistance, this story hits deep. Progress is slow, costly, demanding courage from ordinary people doing extraordinary things.
Have you ever felt power against injustice?
This story proves power isn't in a badge or title, it's in standing tall when the world demands you shrink. If this moved you, if it made you feel seen, heard, or hopeful, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs hope. Because justice doesn't end in the courtroom, it begins with us together, right now.
Can you feel the call to action?
The story of Celeste Monroe is a heart-wrenching yet inspiring testament to the power of resilience and justice. Her experience, facing brutal humiliation at the hands of those meant to uphold the law, only to rise and wield her authority with unyielding strength, stirs a deep emotional response.
How could it not?
The raw injustice of her assault, the stripping of her dignity, and the systemic silence that enabled it are infuriating, yet her response is nothing short of awe-inspiring. Celeste's courage to confront not just one man but an entire corrupt system, to transform her pain into the Monroe Mandate, is a beacon of hope. It's a reminder that true power lies in standing tall against oppression, in speaking truth when silence is easier. Her story resonates deeply, especially for those who felt marginalized, unseen, or silenced. It's a call to action, urging us to challenge injustice wherever it festers. I'm moved by her refusal to let personal trauma define her, instead using it to pave a path for others. Celeste is more than a judge, she's a symbol of what's possible when we refuse to back down. This narrative leaves me hopeful, determined, and profoundly grateful for her unwavering fight.